Okay, welcome to BigTent, where we put democracy over partisanship. There's still time to do something. We have a phone bank to voters in Georgia tomorrow night and voter protection hotline opportunities, which make a difference. Links are in the chat for you to join us. We are 8 days out from Election Day, and many people have already voted. Pollsters are predicting a presidential race closer than any in decades, and tensions are high, very high. As you know, elections are administered by state and local officials. Challenges to election results start at the state and local level. So we are grateful to have with us tonight 3 experts on the state's role in elections, plus as a bonus, Samantha Bee to keep them on their toes. Cisco Aguilar is Secretary of State in Nevada. Before running for office, he had an interesting career in the private sector, including as general counsel for Andre Agassi and Steffi Graf's management company, and as a lawyer for NBC affiliates. Steve Bullock was Attorney General and then governor of Montana, where he was a champion of equitable campaign finance rules. As a Democrat, he worked across the aisle with the Republican legislature to address a wide variety of issues, from infrastructure to conservation to health care. Now that he's no longer in office, he's involved on a number of boards, including, lucky for us, States United Democracy Center. JOANNA Lydgate, back for her 3rd visit to BigTent, is CEO of States United. States United works to ensure free and fair elections, advising state officials and giving backup legal help where needed, coordinating with law enforcement, and making sure lawbreakers are held accountable. As Chief Deputy Attorney General of Massachusetts, JOANNA defended the rule of law in landmark cases. And in her non-existent free time, she's First Lady of Massachusetts. Samantha Bee is, I should say she's a comedian, but she's really an educator, a very entertaining educator, using comedy to get us thinking about important and relevant topics on TV, on her podcast Choice Words, and through her support of other projects. Sam is also the executive producer of the short movie Red, White, and Blue, which many of you saw last week before BigTent hosted a conversation with Nazrin Chowdhury, the filmmaker. And Red, White, and Blue is now available on YouTube for the next 2 weeks for anyone who missed it last week. We'll drop a link in the chat so you can watch it after the Zoom. Put your questions in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can toward the end of the hour. And we'll send a recap of today's event, including recording and links. Okay, over to you, Sam.
Wow, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm so excited to be hosting this very essential conversation with these incredible people. I myself have already voted, early voted. It felt great. Got my stickers. Yes. And again, think of your questions. We're going to be having a Q&A at the end. If your only question is, Samby, what are you going to be dressing as for Halloween? I'll answer it right now. Breakdancer Ray Gun from Australia. We should all be doing that. So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining. This feels more urgent than ever. I'm going to start with my first question is for JOANNA Lydgate. All right, we're going to get you to set the scene for us a little bit. Okay, election day. It's 8 days away, and as I say that, I feel like I feel a little bit sick. Something is coming into the back of my throat. We don't know. Obviously, we don't know how it's going to turn out. Can you tell us what is at stake in this election and how it is that we got here?
Definitely. Well, don't feel sick. It's gonna be a long road, but
Yes.
we have a lot of good news. So
Okay.
let me just start by saying I think we have to stop talking about election day and start talking about election season. And that's actually part of the reason for the title of this conversation. Really, voting has already begun. More than 44 million Americans have already cast ballots as of the latest time I checked today. So we're already in it, and it's going to last a long time. 'Tis a long season. It's going to probably go into January is our prediction, and I'll talk a little bit about sort of what we expect. But let me just start with the stakes. So we have a candidate at the top of the ballot who tried to overturn the 2020 election, lest we forget. and who has systematically worked since then to undermine every aspect of our election system, to say nothing of the damage he's caused in other contexts. And Trump spawned what we now call the election denier movement, but it's much bigger than him. We have people running up and down the ballot who've spread lies and conspiracy theories about our elections, who continue to claim that 2020 was stolen. And it's a national movement. So voters in 41 states right now, Sam, have an election denier on their ballot running either for statewide office or for Congress. And those the statewide races matter a lot because those are the people who oversee elections, which we'll talk more about. And the congressional races matter for a lot of reasons, including that new body, those new members of Congress will be the ones who go through the Electoral College process on January 6th. So we have to make sure that we're electing people who believe in our system, who believe in the will of the people, who will respect it. And as a side note, we have a C4 where we run a website called electiondeniers.org. I highly recommend that those who have not voted, I'm so glad you have, those who've not voted, go to it, check it out. We track all the races in every state, statewide, congressional, and presidential. And we've kept the receipts of what people have said about our elections. Why is there a whole movement focused on undermining elections right now? Well, because if you sow doubt in our elections, it becomes easier to overturn them. So as scary as that is, right, the idea is we convince lots of people that elections can't be trusted. And then if we don't like the results, it's easier for us to try to undermine them. And it's not just people running for office. There have been bills introduced, and there's been litigation, there's disinformation, there's threats against election officials. It's a whole kind of it's a multifaceted movement, but that's kind of the basic gist. So I guess I would say, Sam, when you ask what's at stake is our representative democracy. And I'm really not being hyperbolic. It's just like everything. And actually, some of us might feel like, well, voting rights isn't really my top issue. But, and that was true for me 5 years ago, to be really honest. But today, everything else we care about is coming down to preserving this fundamental right, this freedom to vote. So whether you care about reproductive rights or education or climate, it doesn't matter. We have to have a system where the people we elect to leadership are going to represent our will and our views. So can I just say one piece of good news? Because I really don't want to close.
Yes, please. No, we love good news. Love good news.
First piece of good news is I'm copying your Halloween costume. The second piece of good news is we have a majority of Americans who really do believe in this system. People are with us. In all the polling that we do, we find people consistently say they want every vote counted more than they want their preferred candidate to win, that they have trust in their election officials for good reason. And that's why I think we saw in the midterms that a lot of these candidates who were spewing lies about elections were defeated. In fact, they were all defeated in the statewide races in the battleground states. The second thing is there's been a ton of work done since 2020 to shore up our elections, and we could talk more about that. Really incredible, changes to the law and coordination. And finally, we have so many good pro-democracy election officials across the country. We have one of them right here with us tonight. I'm so glad Secretary Aguilar is on the Zoom, and he can speak to the incredible colleagues he has across the country. But state officials are really on the front lines of protecting this, and we should also talk about how we can give them support and backup.
Great. Yes, state officials. So just essential to this fight. I'm going to turn it to Governor Bullock. Okay. Governor Bullock, can you break that down for us? Because we do think of elections as these just great big national events, but elections are actually run by the states. You've been a governor, you've been an attorney general, now you're a tap master, which is amazing. Tell us how state officials protect elections and protect our votes, but say it in a way that Rudy Giuliani will not understand in case he's taking notes to sabotage us, even though I don't think he understands what's being discussed tonight. But how are state officials protecting elections?
You bet, Sam. And when we think of it this national general election, there is no such counties or county equivalents across the country that is actually administering this election over about 230,000 polling sites. So on the one hand, that's so inspiring to think of all those public servants and volunteers that are willing to be out there doing things. On the other hand, it's also 3,142 different opportunities for something to go wrong in the next 8 days and all the way till January. Statewide officials, the governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state play really critical frontline roles in our elections. And that's also one of the reasons why it's so great the work that States United does. The governor has a handful of different roles they play. One of them is long before the election during the legislature, election policy and funding. It's often the governors that are working with secretaries of states, legislators to have same-day voter registration, to have protections for election officers, to have permanent absentee ballot efforts. Governors also have a critical role to play with regard to election security, cyber threats, disinformation, political disruptions. I often ended up, when I was governor, I'd work with federal law enforcement and state before and at times during to make sure that it's not disrupted. In many places, governors certify the election results. They call it a certificate of ascertainment. Like on the one hand, that should just be sort of a formality, some vestige, but think back to Governor Ducey in Arizona when he was asked essentially not to certify the election and took that role of making sure that he signed the certificate of ascertainment. And governors also play the role. Look, a governor has a significant megaphone in the state, and done right, the governor is actually providing people confidence, batting down misinformation and disinformation, making sure that voters have accurate information when it comes to voting. Now, the Attorney General is the state's chief lawyer and chief law enforcement officer. And in that role, they have essential roles to play as well. One, and maybe the most basic, is making sure that state and federal election laws are actually followed. Includes overseeing compliance with registration, campaign finance laws, voter ID, election security. In the state's role as the chief law enforcement officer, often voter protection, making sure that voters aren't being intimidated from actually getting to exercise their franchise. And as the chief law enforcement officer, the attorney general or the chief lawyer defends the state in litigation. And when election laws results are challenged, it's often the AG that steps up in a good way, like when we saw Attorney General Shapiro in Pennsylvania actually, making sure defending the state's mail-in voting laws and addressing legal challenges, and at times in a challenging way, when the Texas Attorney General actually sued to overturn the results in 4 other states. And finally, I'm not going to pretend. My first job in public service was chief legal counsel to our Secretary of State. I'm not going to pretend to know what Secretary Aguilar does, but the big picture is they're responsible for overseeing, guiding the administration of elections from start to finish. Each of these roles or offices have a critical role to play, and it works so much better when they're working with one another toward that common objective of preserving and protecting our elections. And you also have to remember that the work that Secretary Aguilar and others do, like this doesn't just happen a few weeks before an election. This is their job and their efforts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 365 days a year.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about that because Secretary Aguilar, you are the chief election official of Nevada, okay? A state with almost 2.5 million registered voters. There are hundreds of people on this call. Literally 0 of us want to trade jobs with you right now. How does it actually work? Like, just fundamentally, how does it work? How do you prepare to oversee an election for an entire state when people are calling it rigged before it even begins?
Thank you for having me. And look, it's an honor to be here. Joanna is an amazing, amazing support system. I'm grateful for her support. I'm so grateful for States United and everything they've done to get us to where we are today. Managing an election, this is one of the best jobs I've ever had. I love the work that we're doing. I love the fight. I love the fact that we are getting people to the polls And when somebody tries to tell someone that they don't have a fundamental right to vote or they shouldn't cast a ballot, that's when the energy level starts to rise. And that's when you start to figure out, what does that battle line look like? How do we get to the point to ensure that every Nevadan who's eligible to vote can vote? But the preparation of the election has been going on for 2 years. It actually started before I even assumed office. You know, in Nevada, we understand we had some challenges to be able to do the things we needed to do. We passed legislation to fund our elections at an appropriate level because we knew we weren't going to get that support from the federal government. So we took it on as our responsibility. I worked with our Republican governor to ensure we had a budget line item to fix our elections the way we wanted to fix them. We implemented a statewide system, which is top-down voter registration, which brings transparency to the process throughout the entire 17 counties that we have. But the biggest challenge is elections are about people. It's about the voters, it's about the candidate, and it's about the election workers and poll workers. We knew we had to make an effort to take care of the election workers and the poll workers. So when our legislative session started, we introduced a bill that was our elector protector bill, and it made it a felony to harass or intimidate election workers. And that bill passed both houses of our legislature unanimously and was, fast tracked to the governor's office. And when the governor received that bill, he immediately signed it in front of majority of our 17 clerks across the state. We had one clerk drive 7 hours overnight to be at that bill signing because she understood what that bill did for her and what it did for her team in Lincoln County. And it was really impressive to see the clerks come forward with that. That bill has had some impact in our elections process. We're not seeing some of the things we saw in 2020, fingers crossed, knock on wood, but we're seeing people actually be respectful of poll workers. I've been screaming for the last 18 months to recognize our poll workers and remind people that they are unsung heroes of democracy. We need them in order to run the elections. 80% of poll workers in Nevada and election workers are women. Those are our daughters, our wives, our sisters, our mothers, our grandmothers. And we have to make sure that they can operate within a safe environment and feel comfortable to do the job that they're doing. And when it comes to our clerks, 11 of the 17 are new. 3 of the 11 have already cycled out over the last 6 months. And so again, it's my responsibility to ensure they have the resources, they have the support to be able to run the elections. Our elections in Nevada are run at the county level. They do all the hard lifting. They do all the implementation. They deal with their constituents every day. They live in those communities. They care about their communities, and they want to ensure their communities are driving forward. And when people step in to disrupt that process, we can't allow it, and we have to stand together as a cohesive group and combat those efforts in a significant way. So again, it comes down to the local level. It's about people in those local communities.
I have another question for you because your state offers a lot of options for voters. They can vote by mail, they can use a drop box, they can do early in person, they can show up and do it the old-fashioned way, also fun. But I think that a lot of people don't really understand how their vote gets counted. Like physically, how does it get counted? Can you take us through what happens to a ballot once you cast it, and just however you want to do it? You could just feel free to slow jam it, like it's like we're doing Schoolhouse
I wish
Rock.
I'd have brought props, then I could,
I
done a
wish
show for everybody.
too, you know what I mean? But it's okay. We could do it the old-fashioned way.
So let me start with mail ballots, because that's a great question. It's, something I've been trying to educate Nevadans about too, because I don't think they understand the number of safeguards that are built into the process to ensure that their vote is counted and that their vote is safe. So when an individual receives a mail ballot, they get the ballot, they vote it, and it's mailed back to the county office. When it is received by the county office, it goes through a scan, one, to show that the person used the mail ballot as their way of voting, but also two, it goes through a signature check. That's the major identification of that voter. And if those signatures match, that ballot gets moved into processing. If it doesn't match, it goes into a bipartisan review for a Republican and a Democrat to look at the signature on the ballot, to look at the signature that's on the voter registration card, to look at the signature of that voter on their DMV driver's license or previous election cycles. And those two individuals then decide whether or not those signatures match. If they match, that ballot goes into processing. If it doesn't match, it goes into a curing process where the county then has to reach out to the voter and identify that voter through additional steps to ensure that that vote is counted. We're working really hard to decrease the number of ballots that are going into the curing. One, because we want the vote to count, But we also want county officials focused on the capacity of the ballots that they have on hand and not having to spend the significant amount of time it takes to contact a voter and cure that ballot. Then we have actually in-person voting, which the machines are not connected to the internet at any point of the process. You know, the chain of custody that the votes and the thumb drives go through is so significant, and it's so minute details to ensure the security and safety of those thumb drives. They are then delivered to the, election center. We've been really working hard to secure the safety of those polling managers that are driving those thumb drives back to the election center. Once they're at the election center, they go through a check-in process. Then they go into a very, very secure room, which is not connected to the internet, and process. Each thumb drive is scanned in, it's signed, it's put into the computer, it's tabulated, and then all of those thumb drives are tabulated into one file.
Okay.
Well, then now
what a
I can even talk
journey.
about our digital system, which we call ease, right? That is a third process of where we build in security and processes for a voter. And I'm happy to say Nevada is the first state in the country to allow tribal members living on tribal land to actually use the ease system to vote. Talk about access expansion. That is a huge opportunity to get a community that has not been included in the past to be included as much as possible.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, Joanna, you work with election officials all over the country. You talked about this kind of at the beginning of our chat, because what are they expecting over the next 8 days? And what are they preparing for specifically in the weeks after election day? Because again, as you said, we're never having like a single election day probably ever again. It's election week. It's like switching from one night of Christmas to like 8 nights of Hanukkah, but 0 presents. No fun at all. No one's smiling. Everyone's working. No one's sleeping. What are they expecting?
Definitely they're not expecting any presents, although we should all probably be sending them some. So we actually have a slide, if this is helpful, Sam, to walk through some of the key dates, because I think
Great.
sort of having a sense of what to expect is good, and then being able to spread the word about why this is going to take time, because there's definitely going to be a lot of disinformation swirling about, what's happening and why are the results taking so long, and et cetera. So this is the basic timeline. Right now, we're in the early voting period. As I said, about 44 million people have already voted. You're already seeing, lots of like lies and conspiracies, again, that are being seeded to be able to undermine the results. Things like non-citizens are voting and dead people are voting, and et cetera. The voter rolls can't be trusted. And our election officials are dealing with that stuff right now, 24/7, as you said. Then we get to November 5th, we get to election day. Again, we've talked about why that's a misnomer, but that day, we're not going to know anything. I mean, we'll know some things, but we're not going to have the results. And that's in part because of the expansion of mail-in voting and just the time it's going to take to count ballots. And also because we know this is going to be a race with extraordinarily tight margins. And whenever there are tight margins, takes time, and also there's litigation. So the theme of what I'm about to say is like, there's gonna be a lot of litigation all the way through. It takes time, especially, I just want to make this point as people get ready to watch the results come in. It takes time, especially in bigger counties and swing states. So take Maricopa County in Arizona as an example, where the city of Phoenix is. The election officials there have said it might take 10 to 13 days for them to tally results. And those bigger cities that often take more time also tend to be more democratic. So the fact that they're the focus of disinformation definitely isn't a coincidence. So the election officials we've been working with have been preparing as much as they can, talking to voters proactively, putting the facts out there, reminding them this is going to take time, and we need to give our trusted election officials the space to do their jobs. The next big deadline is December 11th, which is when states, as Governor Bullock said, have to issue this thing called a certificate of ascertainment, which is kind of just a fancy way of saying they have to formalize their state's results. And we're going to probably see some things happen before then. One of the things we might see, which I can definitely talk about more if folks are interested, is that county officials who are election deniers may refuse to certify their local results, which would get in the way of issuing that final certificate. That's not a thing. Like, if they do that, we're going to take them to court, and they're not going to succeed. It's never succeeded anywhere, anytime, because certification isn't a choice, it's a duty, but they may try to do that. So then eventually we're going to get to December 17th, which is the date when the electors meet in the states. Once we have final results, again, we're just going to see a lot of legal challenges to those results, just like we did in 2020. And some of that will be claims of like massive widespread fraud. Again, things like conspiracy theories about voting machines, or, widespread non-citizen voting. And some might be challenges at the hyper-local level to how the election was run in a particular place. But we will eventually make it to January 6th. And when Congress meets to count the electoral votes. And again, here, I think there may be litigation surrounding that process, and a new law that was passed that's really important, called the Electoral Count Reform Act, which puts some safeguards in place and makes it harder to sabotage a presidential election. But it's a new law and untested, so we may see some noise around that. And then, of course, assuming all goes well, and I truly believe that it will, it's just going to take time, we get to the inauguration, the peaceful transfer of power on January 20th.
Okay, well, from your lips to God's ears. Okay, so can you just tell me again, just because we all remember what happened in 2020, we certainly do remember, what, if this is for the wide group, can you tell me what specifically has been done to make our elections stronger and more resilient? This is for the wide group.
Do you guys want me to go first?
Go for it, Joanna.
Okay. I'll do my best, and then you guys should fill in. I would say the TLDR is that a lot has been done.
Okay.
Secretary Aguilar talked about the protections that have been passed in Nevada, and those have been passed in other states too, for our election system and our election workers. We have this federal law that protects the electoral college process. A big one for us at States United is all the accountability work that's been done to make sure people face consequences for violating the norms of our democracy, for breaking the law. So whether that's insurrectionists or the Trump lawyers who we've helped disbar, or making sure that county officials who've refused to certify, see consequences as well. And that stuff really matters, because it sets an example and it acts as a deterrent. I would say journalists are more educated than ever. News organizations have whole democracy beats. The public is much more aware of the threat, I think, today than 4 years ago. And while we've seen some recent, the word in the field is anticipatory obedience on the part of certain news outlets, not deciding not to make endorsements and et cetera. I think by and large, there has been really good coverage of what's happening in this moment. And finally, I'll just say, and I alluded to this at the beginning, just really strong communication and coordination in the pro-democracy community, which is much bigger. And I want to just say, like, while there is this anti-democracy movement, and it is a loud one, it is a faction in this country. And the most important thing we can all do is get out and vote, whether now or on election day, to make sure that this majority of Americans who do care about our system, make their voices heard.
Great.
No, I'd only echo on that. Look, if I think back 4 years ago when I was signing a certificate of ascertainment, I didn't know all of those details that even Joanna had put up on that last slide. So we are so much better prepared this time around. I was part of a tabletop exercise that they made a documentary called War Game about, to try to turn around and say, what if there's efforts on January 6th? I'm regularly asked to comment. It's become part of the overall discussion. When we talk about elections, we also talk about election integrity and preserving democracy. So I think so much has been done, but we also shouldn't kind of put our head in the sand when you have 171 members of Congress from 37 states still denying the results of the last election. You can see that on States United C4 election deniers website, or as Joanna said, when the presidential nominee and the vice president won't commit to the election unless it's fair in their terms, and much of the leadership is the same way. So we have to remember that so much has been done, but it won't be just when all votes are counted. This is going to be all the way through until someone raises their hand to be sworn in as the next president. And that same vigilance that we have 8 days out for an election, I think we collectively as a country have to maintain that vigilance for democracy all the way through into mid-January.
The word is vigilance. The word is vigilance. I'm gonna ask the wide group this question, and I'm sure that I will regret asking this question because I'll probably never sleep again. But as you all get ready for this election, what is keeping you awake at night? Is it like deep fakes? Is it old episodes of Dexter? Is it like, tell me what is, what's going on in your minds as you go to, like, what's waking you up in the middle of the night and you're going, oh no.
What wakes me up in the middle of the night is just understanding the ability of the team to continue to drive forward. Everybody is working so hard to do what they
Right.
need to do to make sure this election is secure, safe, and accessible. It's making sure that they don't run out of gas before November 5th. It's making sure the clerks in some of these small rural counties are continuing to do the job we need them to do, and that they're not giving up. The first day of early voting here in Nevada, it was a big day and there was a lot of anxiety and there was a lot of stress, and we felt the stress among some of the clerks, and we had to jump in and be there for them to help them get through the actual day and to make sure that it was ready to go for the next 2 weeks. It goes back to elections are about people, and we have to take care of our people because people can be broken and they do break sometimes. And that's the unfortunate part.
Right. I bet burnout must be a huge concern. A huge concern.
I think
People are getting there.
especially in this climate where,
Yeah.
people did not sign up for these jobs thinking they were going to have to deal with threats, harassment, people showing up at their home, doxing of their kids. And that's part of why the bill that Nevada passed is so important, but also it's part of why we all need to collectively be showing our support and our gratitude for the work that election officials and election workers do all across the country. They're the heroes of our democracy, and there has definitely been attrition in these jobs for a reason. So it makes a lot of sense that would be the thing that Cisco is focused on.
Can you talk a little bit about the work that law enforcement is doing to keep elections safe? Because there are some stories coming out of Pennsylvania and extra measures being taken. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. We do a lot of work with law enforcement at States United, training them, preparing them for election season, helping to connect them with election officials on the ground. And I think it's important to remember or recognize that, for decades before 2020, this was not a part of law enforcement's job. Like election day was pretty much a non-event, right? And it wasn't a time when you needed to be worried about things like massive voter intimidation, militia members at drop boxes, protests on the front lawn of a Secretary of State, protests at counting facilities and the like. And so that's really changed. And, law enforcement has really been brought into the work of election protection. I think when you talk about something that, keeps us up at night, I think a thing that's probably keeping a lot of voters up at night right now is the possibility of political violence, the possibility of public safety threats on and after election day. Obviously, the insurrection is still, very much seared into our brains. And just last week, I spoke at the largest gathering of police chiefs in the country about preparing for this election. And I will say there was such receptivity. We see such engagement from law enforcement. We've seen a lot of action by law enforcement too. Again, I talked about the accountability work, but also in the midterms when we saw people, stationing themselves at drop boxes and we've seen law enforcement really, really step up. And that's another major development since 2020, I guess I would say, is that there's just been a lot more training and awareness, and we work with those leaders every day. So I really do feel like this is a place where we're as prepared as we can be. It's not to say that we won't see threats. I think for voters, the most important thing is to remember that voting is safe and secure no matter how you vote. And I really do feel like Election Day, that's covered. I think, again, this period afterwards where we're going to have delay and we're going to have litigation, that's a time where all of us trying to keep the calm, keep the peace, and stay patient is going to be really important.
Right. We have so many good questions coming into the chat. So I'm just going to ask a few more questions of the panel and then we'll get to the good Q&A stuff. I just want to know from Governor Bullock, what can people do? We know everybody should vote. Besides vote, everybody vote, definitely vote. I took my daughter. She voted for the first time in her life. That was pretty exciting. That was nice and sweet.
Cool.
But what can people do that is just very much more helpful than just obsessing about polling averages and playing with maps online? Nate Silver has just given up. Should we? Like,
Yeah,
what do we
more
do?
than
What
just
should we do?
voting. Yeah, more than just voting, right? Reminding others that there's one day every couple of years where you're more powerful than any interest, special interest, or corporation. That's Election Day. We all hold that same power. So encouraging others certainly to vote.
Right.
Volunteer to be a poll worker. I have no doubt that Secretary Aguilar and others, like, I still vote on Election Day because I love seeing my former high school teachers that all volunteer, and it should be all people that are 75 or 80 up actually volunteering at the polls. Thank and uplift some of those poll workers, certainly. Push back on election lies and conspiracies. We are so deeply polarized right now. I'm not saying get into X fights with Elon Musk, but when you have someone that suggesting something that is also not true, ask the questions. Don't condemn them, but ask the questions and make sure that they're thinking about it, so then we can get over some of this. Consider taking all that angst next time and running for office. School board is some of the most important positions you could have out there, whatever you choose to run. And for those that could give, certainly give to some of those groups that are doing the democracy work, because look, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Vegetarian, it doesn't matter. What we have to remember is that there are norms that have served this country so well over the last 250 years, and we have to protect those norms, and that's protecting democracy.
Right.
Sam, can I add one other thing in the what can we do? I think Cisco's going to like this. We can all advocate for civics education in our communities and our states. My daughter's 13, and recently she was like running around the house chanting 270 to win. And I was like, what? And I realized it's because and now maybe she understands a little bit more what I do, but it's because she is in 8th grade taking civics, and it makes such a difference in terms of helping the next generation understand, what's at stake, how the system works, et cetera.
That's just a great strategy for getting out of this mess. I mean, I have always believed that like a real bipartisan push to just vote, get people voting, get people engaged in have people understand civics is critical. So Joanna, how do we get out of this mess? I mean, people are ready to move on. People are so ready to move on from lies, conspiracy theories. Can we move into a future where elections seem boring again and we all kind of line up and we do it, but it's a real like paper bag lunch, and will we ever have that again, and how can we get that?
We've talked about making t-shirts that say make elections boring again.
Yes.
So that is a good motto. We can. I think vigilance around democracy is going to need to continue far beyond January 20th. Unfortunately, over the last 4 years, we've watched this movement expand and change and become more sophisticated. So I don't think it's going anywhere, even if Trump is not in the White House. But I will say, we talked about what keeps us up at night. Let me say what gets me out of bed in the morning, because I think that's important. The first thing is, and I mentioned this, Americans are with us. And so I think what we can do there is we can capitalize better on that. Democracy is a word that means really different things to different people. If you dig into like the polling, for some people it means immigration, like for other people it means elections. And so we need to make it more concrete. We need to make what you just said, Sam, why you should vote, the freedom to vote, why the system is so important. People want elections to be free, fair, and secure. They care about our elections, and we need to make that real for folks. The second thing that gets me out of bed is this incredible network of election officials we have. And so what we can do there is we can protect them, we can celebrate them, and we can call it out when we see people spreading disinformation about the system, because somebody like Cisco already has a hard enough job to do to be trying to fight back constantly on all these lies about what happens in Nevada around elections. Like it's really difficult. So the third thing that gets me out of bed is that our election system is really tried and true. It survived a big test in 2020. We have much more we can do to fortify it. Civics education is just one small example. And I guess finally, I would say when we get the facts out to people, they turn out for democracy. We talked about those election denier races, and they happened all over the swing states. And then what we found was when we told people, like, this person's running for Secretary of State, and they don't acknowledge that 2020 was a legitimate election, or they went and they're part of a militia group, or they met with Trump to try to overturn the results. The favorability goes way down, and people don't vote for those candidates because fundamentally they don't like these lies. So I think we really need to continue this work, and everybody needs to be part of this pro-democracy movement, and help push back on the disinformation in particular.
I love it. I'm going to get to this chat is very robust. It is a very active chat, and a lot of these questions are very active. Good questions. Good questions. So I'm gonna start asking some of them to you. There are a lot of questions about the mailboxes that were tampered with. So what is going to be done about the ballots burnt in voting boxes in Oregon, in Washington, and in general? When these things, what is being done about that? What can be done about that?
Cisco, do you want to answer, or do you want me to?
Sure. If that occurred in Nevada, thankfully has not occurred in Nevada.
It did. Oh, okay.
It has not.
Okay.
But if it did occur,
yeah,
what we would ask is voters that dropped off their mail ballots into those mailbox go onto their voter profile to check the status of their ballot. If their ballot had been received by the county clerk, they were good to go. If it had not been received by the county clerk, to call the county office, have them void out, cancel that ballot, and get a new ballot issued to them, or show up at a polling location in person to cast their vote.
Okay.
So I think, Sam, states have lots of safeguards in place to protect ballots, including tracking ballots. So it's a really important thing to remember. While this is deeply upsetting, and another example of the ways in which our elections have become subject, unfortunately, to threats and violence, the system does have a lot of checks, and so voters voters who may be impacted will have a remedy. But also, this is a crime. So law enforcement is going to be involved. They'll investigate. There will be criminal consequences for anybody engages in arson of this kind, or any other election-related criminal activity.
Okay.
In Nevada, we have worked really well with the Postal Service and their law enforcement team. The Nevada Secretary of State's office has the Election Integrity Task Force, which is made up of federal, state, and local law enforcement. And within that is the Postal Service law enforcement team, and being able to coordinate and collaborate when issues like this pop up has really, really been super helpful.
Okay, that's great. Everybody's ready. Everybody's ready. People are reading a lot about threats to poll workers, and even homeowners who are putting up their signs in their yard. Is this a real threat, and what can be done about that?
We know it's a real threat because we had to spend a significant amount of time going out there to recruit poll workers, to recruit election workers. If the threats didn't exist and the intimidation didn't exist, we would see our regular group of folks coming back for the election, but they're not.
Mhm.
And so we had to get really creative to go out there and recruit new poll workers and get them engaged. It also allowed us, though, an opportunity to be smart and creative. In Washoe County, where Reno is located, they went and spoke to every high school in Washoe County to talk about being a poll worker. And you only need to be 16 in Nevada to be a poll worker. And what that does is it accomplishes three things. One, it engages somebody that may not know about the process, exposes them to the process, gets them excited about election administration or running for office. Two, it drives turnout, right? If Johnny is working a polling location, the whole family is going to go to that polling location to vote. Third is, especially in Nevada, we're extremely diverse from a population standpoint, an ethnic perspective, is you have somebody there who probably speaks the language of the community and can make voters feel comfortable within the polling location.
Do you have any sense? Here's a good question. We're going to talk about levels of security at the local and state level, but is there any sense about what security is going to look like at the Capitol when they certify? Like, what if we have another, God forbid, what if we have another January 6th? What is being prepared in DC? Can anyone on this call speak to that?
I don't have personal information about the various preparations of law enforcement, but I can say big picture that absolutely law enforcement is going to be prepared. And that's true, not just at the Capitol on January 6th, but, throughout this process, because I actually think that, some of these local threats may be the ones that, are more likely than another attack on the Capitol. That said, I am certain that federal and DC law enforcement have extensive plans in place. One of the things we do with law enforcement leaders is really deep scenario planning. It's like every possible scenario that could arise,
Yeah, what does that look like?
We go through it. It's like, what if this, then that, and
Right.
some of the things that we've seen do include threats to poll workers and threats to election officials. But I think it's also important to remember that those are rare, that law enforcement is prepared, that law enforcement will intervene and hold people accountable, as I said, and also that there's a lot of people for whom these attacks on the system have caused them to want to kind of like dig in more. Do you know what I mean? To really step up and do whatever they can. Our democracy is under attack. There's no doubt about it. And so I think each of us should do whatever we feel like we can, whether that's volunteering, whether that's putting a sign on the lawn, whether it's certainly getting out to vote.
Governor Bullock, what are you hearing? Everybody wants to know what you are hearing from Republicans in your state from behind closed doors. Open those doors.
Yeah.
Reveal all to us.
Sam, the beauty is, like, we don't even have to discuss what's happening behind closed doors because it's all right out there in front of us.
Right.
When Chris LaCivita, Trump's senior advisor, the day he was nominated, said, "This isn't over on election day, this is over on inauguration day." When you have all of these folks trying to dispel seeds of doubt that somehow all these people without documentation are voting in every jurisdiction, when you have the repeated statements about, well, we'll see if this is a fair election. So I don't think it's just Montana where there's a lot of this out there. Like, I had made the mistake in 2016 saying, I wish people cared as much about elections and the process as they do about professional football, right? On any given Sunday, you have millions of people watching. Now I think people care about elections like they care about professional football. You're a Las Vegas Raiders fan. Not only do I hate you, I hate your aunt, I hate your uncle. That level of polarization with the disinformation, misinformation has changed what's happening. So we see it up front, them setting the stakes to try to invalidate or sow the seeds of doubt about this election. And what we all have to do, not only the good work that States United and Secretaries of States and AGs are doing, but then we all have that obligation. You'd ask that question about people concerned about having a sign in their yard, right? We all have that
Right.
obligation to try to bring people back to the realities of that this will be a fair election. And I've been deeply disappointed at times with election results, but there's something even larger than that, and that's the norms and protecting those norms. And we all have to be the voice of reason, especially in the face of times where people will be unreasonable.
I'm going to ask this question of all three of you, and you can give me each your different perspective. What legislation would you enact to protect elections nationwide if we had a forward-thinking Congress? What would you?
Mine would be funding, really.
Yeah.
I think funding is critical. You know, over this cycle, we were spending collectively $5 billion. And thankfully, this US Senate had some sense of responsibility and appropriated $70 million to states for elections. But if we're not going to fund them, we're not going to have the innovation we need to make our elections more transparent, more accessible. And again, it's just everything surrounds unfunding. I've traveled to all 17 counties in Nevada, met with the clerks in their office, met with them in their communities. And when you're there in person, you see the deficiencies of what they're dealing with.
Right.
You see the stress in their staff's face. And to show up there and show that you care is really an incredible experience. And that's when you realize how important funding and investment is.
Right.
I think we spend more on parking infrastructure in this country than we do on elections, for real. So I really just want to strongly agree with Cisco on that one, that I think everything else depends on the ability of incredible folks like him to do their jobs and to hire the teams that they need and to have the resources to run this process that, as I said, is the foundation for everything else that we care about in this country, and really the future of the country. So I hate to copy, but definitely agree.
Yeah, and I'd only add that if I could wave the wand, any measure that makes people feel more personally empowered, because I think part of the problem is that people say that their vote or their voice doesn't matter. That's certainly taking up another Voting Rights Act. That's campaign finance reform. It's making sure that people know that their voice matters so much in elections. So then they're less apt to turn around and
Right.
discount the results of an election if they know that this was my election and I was an equal participant.
Right. Right. Is there, well, can you talk about gerrymandering a little bit? Just state and national gerrymandering. What are we doing? What's the solution? I'm going to direct that. Just solve it all. We have 6 minutes left. Governor Bullock, what do we do about gerrymandering? Go. You have 3 minutes to solve it all. Go for it.
I'll be quick. 1990, 135 congressional districts were competitive, meaning plus or minus 5 points. Now we're down to about 25 or 30. What that makes is both sides of the parties actually, if you're running in a Republican district, you're going to go further to the right, the Democrat further to the left. It is horrible for overall democracy. You've seen some reforms at the state levels. Courts have stepped up. It would be great if we could actually wave that magic wand and have independent redistricting commissions in every single state. But so much of this does go state by state. We've seen great things happening with the right leaders in states like Michigan. I think if I try to find some positive of the last 4 or 6 years, one of the positive things is that people are actually focused on democracy more than they had in the past. So I think we'll see more and more efforts on a bipartisan basis to try to say, let's make sure that everybody has a fair shot at representation, and that citizens will actually require that of us along the way as well.
Right. Get people to the polls. Drive your teenager, make them vote. I mean, this was a great conversation, really active in the chat. It was amazing. Any last looks were 8 or 7 days. Oh my God, I don't know. It's next week. Any last inspiring thoughts? Anything we can tell people to make sure they understand the vital importance of voting and that their vote will be counted?
And
I
it's
swear.
the vote is counted because of groups like States United. I say this all the time, and this is no joke. I would be dead if it wasn't for States United. The fact that they give me the support from a legal perspective to be able to defend against some of these baseless lawsuits that we're facing every single day is really the key to protecting that vote, to ensure we can show up on election day and cast that ballot.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I'd only add, Sam, like, just like you, on my election day, I'm taking two of my kids, and those kids are gonna vote for the first time, and they are excited about it. That makes me excited too, that we all have to exercise that franchise, but then we also have to remember that not everything's gonna be decided in the next 8 days,
Mhm.
and we've gotta help turn down the temperature between next week, 8 days from now, and early January, and make sure that States United and others, and secretaries of states and AGs can do the good work that they can, and we're supporting them.
Right.
Um,
And telling everyone that their vote is secret. It's secret. It's private. Promise.
I really appreciate the love from Secretary Aguilar, but I'm going to turn it back and say that I think the faith that I have in the system is so much based on the incredible people who are running it. And you know, one of the things I didn't get to say about States United is that we're a bipartisan organization. We have a board of Republicans and Democrats. Steve is one of them. We are a team that works with Republicans and Democrats in the states. In 2020, we watched Republican election officials stand up and speak truth about our elections. And we've, of course, seen, you know, a lot of really courageous folks do so since then. And so I just have the utmost faith in Cisco and his colleagues across the country. And as you said, the members of our communities who are out there doing the work at our local polling places. And you know, I think that everyone on this Zoom and everyone beyond needs to really be spreading the word about how important our elections are, but also how trustworthy they are. And we've watched them under consistent attack. You know, my hope is that we get through this election cycle and then we can start to do the healing that we need to do as a country.
Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody who joined. Thanks to everybody who was so active in the Love and Active chat. Absolutely great. And I guess we'll see you all on the other side.